Anna lived by the creed of the fence line. It was a simple creed. What was on her side was hers to tend. What was on the other side was not. Her property was the last before the county dissolved into scrubland and rock, a place the town of Redemption considered the edge of the world. She had a cabin, a well, a hardy garden, and a mare that was as quiet and resilient as she was. It was enough. She had learned long ago that wanting more was a dangerous thing. The townspeople left her mostly to herself. They came to her for two things: for the remedies her Apache mother had taught her, and for translation when talk was needed with the bands that moved through the high country. They did not trust her, not fully. Her blood was a line drawn down the middle of her. Her father had been a white trapper, a man who had loved the wild more than civilization, and her mother a woman who had taught her the language of the earth before the language of men. Both were gone now, claimed by fever in the same winter, leaving Anna with a stillness that the people in Redemption mistook for pride. She was too tall, they said. Her gaze was too direct. She did not chatter or perform the small, soft gestures of the other women. She simply was, and that seemed to unnerve them. So she stayed on her side of the fence line, in the quiet world she had built from what was left over. She had stopped expecting anything to change. The rhythm of her days was set by the sun and the seasons. She rose in the gray light before dawn, the air cool and tasting of dust and pine. She worked until the sky bruised with evening, her hands always busy, her mind settled into the steady cadence of tasks. Mending the roof, turning the soil, chopping wood for the coming cold. It was a life of deliberate actions, each one a small anchor holding her to the earth. She was not lonely. Loneliness was a hollow thing, an ache for what was missing. Anna was full. She was full of the silence of the plains, the heat of the sun on her shoulders, the scent of sage after a rare rain. She had accepted this solitude not as a failure, but as a fact, like the hardness of the ground or the vastness of the sky. Partnership, she had concluded, was not for her. She had seen the way the men in town looked at her, with curiosity, sometimes with a flicker of desire, but always with a barrier of caution. She was not like their women. She did not need them to fix her fences or bargain for her flour. Her competence was its own kind of fence line, and most men were unwilling to cross it. She did not blame them. She did not blame anyone. It was simply the way things were. So she lived her life, her heart a quiet, well-kept house that no one ever visited. She had made her peace with it. Or so she had told herself. The change came on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of faded denim. It arrived with the frantic ringing of the town bell, a sound that rarely meant anything good. Sheriff Miller appeared at her gate before noon. His horse lathered and his face pale with a fear he was trying to hide behind importance. The Tanner boy, 10 years old, had been taken. He had wandered from his family's picnic down by the San Saba Fork and had been picked up by a small band of Chiricahua. A ranch hand had seen it from a ridge. The town was a hornet's nest of fury and panic. A posse had been formed and then, wisely, disbanded by the Army lieutenant stationed at the sad little fort 20 miles east. Lieutenant Davies was a man who believed in procedure over passion. He had sent a rider out, and a meeting had been arranged. That was why the sheriff was here. The meeting was to take place at the Three Creeks Crossing, which bordered Anna's land. They needed her. They needed her to speak the words they could not. "They want tobacco and 3 good rifles," Miller said, avoiding her eyes. "And the boy will be returned." Anna simply nodded. She understood the grammar of these arrangements. It was a transaction, born of desperation on one side and opportunity on the other. The day of the handover was tense. The air itself seemed stretched thin, ready to snap. Half the town had come out, keeping their distance on a low rise, their wagons forming a barricade of misplaced hope. Lieutenant Davies was there in his clean uniform, looking rigid and out of place against the dusty landscape. Sheriff Miller just looked nervous, his hand hovering near the butt of his pistol. Anna stood between the two groups, a silent bridge over a chasm of fear. The Apache delegation arrived just after midday. 5 men, led by an elder named Chato, whose face was a map of years she could only imagine. Anna greeted him in his own tongue. She spoke of the sun, the health of the horses, the importance of keeping one's word. He listened, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the rifles laid out on a blanket. He saw the nervous soldiers. He saw the frightened townsfolk on the hill. And then he made a new demand. Anna translated his words, her voice even and without inflection. He says the boy is safe, but they have heard of broken promises before. To ensure the boy is returned unharmed after they take the goods, they require a hostage. One of your men will go with them. He will be returned at the fork in the river road once they see the boy is safe with you. A wave of unease rippled through the soldiers. Lieutenant Davies's face hardened. That was not the agreement. The agreement has changed, Anna said quietly. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the assembly. The sheriff looked at the lieutenant. The lieutenant looked at his men, their faces suddenly young and afraid. The sheriff then turned to the small group of ranchers and townsmen who had come with him. We need a volunteer, he said, his voice cracking slightly, just for an hour or two. A show of good faith. No one moved. The men suddenly found great interest in the toes of their boots. They were brave men when it came to cattle or storms, but this was different. This was the unknown. This was a fear passed down in stories told by the fire. The silence grew heavy. The Tanner boy's father let out a choked sob. Anna felt a familiar resignation settle in her bones. This was the world of men, full of loud talk and sudden cowardice. And then, a man stepped forward. He had been standing near the back, by his horse, separate from the others. Anna had noticed him in town a few times. He had bought the old McKenna place a year ago, a hardscrabble ranch that had broken 2 families before him. He was quiet, steady, a man who seemed to take up no more space than was necessary. His name was Silas. He walked past the sheriff and the lieutenant until he stood a few feet from Anna. I will do it, he said. His voice was calm. It was not the voice of a man seeking glory or trying to prove his courage. It was the voice of a man stating a simple fact. The sheriff stared, dumbfounded. Silas, you don't have to. You asked for a volunteer, Silas said, his eyes on the Apache elder. He did not seem to be looking at Chato with fear, but with a kind of level assessment. Then he looked at Anna. It was the first time anyone had looked at her all day without a filter of need or suspicion. He just looked at her. His eyes were the color of the plains in winter, a quiet, steady gray. In his gaze, she was not the half-breed translator, not the strange woman from the edge of town. She was a person, and in that moment he seemed to see her completely. He saw her competence. He saw the stillness she wore like a shield. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement between the only 2 people there who seemed to understand the reality of the situation. Anna felt something shift inside her, a small, quiet click, like a lock finding its key. She turned to Chato and spoke. This man will go with you, she said. He is a man of his word. Chato studied Silas for a long moment, his gaze sharp. He looked at Silas's hands, which were calm at his sides. He looked at his eyes, which held no fear. Chato nodded. The transaction was made. Silas handed his gun belt to the sheriff without ceremony and walked toward the Apache men. He moved with an easy, deliberate stride, a man comfortable in his own skin. The Tanner boy was brought forward, dusty and crying, and was quickly swept into his father's arms. The town exhaled in a collective rush of relief. They had their boy back. They barely watched as Silas rode away with the Apache, disappearing over the rise. But Anna watched. She watched until he was gone. The handover was successful. An hour later, Silas rode back to the fork in the road, alone and unharmed, as promised. The town celebrated, The Tanners wept with joy, and Lieutenant Davies wrote a self-congratulatory report. In the noise and relief, Silas's quiet act of courage was almost immediately absorbed into the background, a strange footnote to the day's drama. The town didn't know what to make of him. He had done something none of them would, and it made them uneasy. They treated him with a new, distant respect, but it was tinged with the same suspicion they held for anything they did not understand. A week passed. The dust settled. Anna's life returned to its familiar rhythm. She told herself that the moment at the creek had meant nothing. It was a brief flicker of connection in a life defined by its absence. A trick of the light. Then, one afternoon, she saw a rider approaching her property. It was Silas. He stopped his horse at her gate, not opening it, just waiting. Anna came out onto her porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mister," she said, her voice neutral. "I was wondering about the water rights on this edge of my property," he said. "If they draw from the same creek." It was a flimsy excuse. The water rights had been settled for 50 years. She knew it and he knew it. She said nothing, just waited. He reached down and unhooked a heavy sack from his saddle. "This is for you," he said, "for your trouble at the creek." It was a sack of fine flour from the mill in the next county. A costly and thoughtful thing. "That was not necessary," she said. "I know," he replied. He tipped his hat and rode away. He came back the next week. This time he said he was tracking a stray calf. He stopped at her well for a drink of water. He noticed a loose post in her corral fence. "That could use mending," he observed. "I will get to it," she said. The next morning the post was fixed. Solid and straight, braced with new wood. He had come back after she was asleep, in the dark, and done the work. He found other reasons to come by. He asked her about a patch of bitterroot he had found, if it was good for anything. She told him how to prepare it. He listened, his attention focused and complete. He never stayed long. He never pushed. He simply appeared, made his quiet observation or asked his practical question, and then left. Each visit was a small, smooth stone dropped into the still pool of her life, the ripples spreading out in ways she did not yet understand. One morning, she went out to her front gate and found it transformed. The old one, which had sagged and complained for years, was gone. In its place was a new gate, crafted from cedar, the wood smooth and fragrant. It was perfectly balanced. It swung open with a gentle push and closed with a quiet, satisfying click. It was a beautiful and practical thing. An act of service that spoke louder than 100 pretty words. She knew who had made it. She ran a hand over the wood, feeling the care that had gone into its construction. He had seen a need and met it, without asking for thanks or recognition. He had seen her. The town noticed his visits. Of course they noticed. In a place like Redemption, a man's repeated path was as easy to read as a map. When Silas went to the general store for supplies, George Alcott leaned over the counter. George was a decent man, but he was a vessel for the town's collective curiosity. "You spend a lot of time out at the county line, Silas?" he said, weighing a bag of coffee beans. Silas did not react. He just waited. "That's Anna's place," George continued, as if Silas might have been confused. "People are talking." Silas finally looked up, his gray eyes unreadable. "Let them," he said. He paid for his coffee and left. The conversation, or what passed for it, was reported all over town by nightfall. Anna knew she should not allow herself to hope. Hope was a fragile thing, easily broken. But it was too late. A tiny seed of it had been planted that day at the creek, and Silas's quiet, steady attention had been like sun and water. It was beginning to grow. She found herself listening for the sound of his horse. She found herself baking a little extra bread, just in case. She was angry with herself for this foolishness. She was a practical woman, and this feeling was anything but practical. One afternoon, she was walking back from the creek, her arms full of wild mint she had gathered. He was there, waiting for her on the path. Not on his horse this time, but on foot. He had been waiting for some time. She stopped when she saw him, her heart giving a small, traitorous leap. He did not waste time on greetings or talk of the weather. "The gate was from me," he said. It was a statement, not a confession. Anna clutched the mint to her chest, the sharp, clean scent filling the air between them. "I know," she said. He took a slow breath, the kind a man takes before doing something difficult. "I come by because I want to," he said, his voice low and clear. "Not for fences or herbs. Not for water rights." He looked at her then, his gaze as direct and honest as it had been that first day. "I saw you at the creek," he said. "Everyone else was performing. The lieutenant was performing his authority. The sheriff was performing his concern. The men were performing their fear." He paused, searching for the right words. "But you," he continued, "you were not performing. You were just there, doing the work that needed to be done. You were the only one who was still, the only one who was real." Anna felt the truth of his words resonate deep inside her. He had seen the very thing she had cultivated her entire life, the thing that had set her apart and made her an outcast, and he had named it as a virtue. "I had to know you, Anna," he said, his voice soft but firm. The world seemed to fall silent around them. There was only the hum of insects, the rustle of the wind in the dry grass, and the steady beating of her own heart. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever wanted to know her. They had wanted things from her, her skills, her knowledge, but not her. "I would like to call on you properly," he said, his request formal and respectful. "To sit on your porch and talk. If you would have me." She stood there for a long moment, the scent of mint sharp in her nose, the weight of his words settling over her. This was the moment the fence line came down. This was the moment to let someone cross. It was the most terrifying and wonderful feeling she had ever known. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Saturday evening, then," she said, her voice barely a whisper. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his stern features. It was like seeing the sun break over a winter landscape. "Saturday," he agreed. He came the following Saturday, and every Saturday after that. He would arrive just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Anna would have a pot of coffee ready. They would sit on her porch in the 2 chairs she had, and they would talk. At first, the conversations were hesitant, careful explorations of the space between them. But soon the talk deepened. It flowed not into the shallow waters of small talk, but into the quiet depths of their lives. He spoke of the war. He did not tell glorious stories of battle, but quiet, plain truths about the cold, the fear, and the bone-deep weariness of it. He spoke of coming west to find a place where the silence was bigger than the noise in his own head. Anna, in turn, found herself speaking of things she had never told another soul. She told him of her mother's hands, how they could find healing in the most common of weeds. She told him of her father's stories, tales of mountains so high they scraped the stars. She spoke of the ache of being caught between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither, and of the peace she had finally made with her own solitude. He listened. He listened in a way that made her feel not just heard, but understood. He did not offer pity or easy platitudes. He offered only his quiet, steady presence. He brought her gifts. They were never frivolous things. One week, it was an axe handle he had carved from a piece of hickory, perfectly weighted and smooth as glass. "A good tool is a friend for life," he said. Another time, he brought a small, leather-bound book of poetry. "I ordered it from a catalog," he admitted almost shyly. "The words made me think of this place, of you." And one evening, he arrived with a small, thorny bundle wrapped in damp cloth. It was a cutting from a rose bush. "It was my mother's," he said. "It's a hardy thing. It doesn't ask for much, but it gives back more than you'd expect." They planted it together by the side of the porch, their hands brushing as they worked the soil. The small, shared act felt more intimate than any touch she had ever imagined. They built a foundation, not with grand declarations, but with these small, solid blocks of shared time and mutual understanding. One evening, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Anna voiced the fear that had been a quiet hum beneath the surface of her happiness. "The town thinks I am strange," she said, her gaze on the horizon. "They say I am too quiet, too much my own person." Silas was silent for a moment, considering her words. "I think the town has it backwards," he said finally. "They are loud, so they think quiet is strange. They lean on each other for every little thing, so they think self-sufficiency is a fault." He turned to look at her, his face serious in the twilight. "You don't perform, Anna. You never have. Not for them, not for me. It's the most honest thing I've ever seen." He understood. He saw her core, the very essence of her being, and he did not want to change it. He valued it. In that moment, she knew she was irrevocably lost. Or perhaps, for the first time in her life, she was found. The season turned. The air grew crisp, and the leaves on the cottonwood trees by the creek turned a brilliant, fleeting gold. Their courtship had become a comfortable, established rhythm, a new season in both their lives. The town still watched, but their whispers had changed. The suspicion had softened into a kind of grudging admiration. They saw the new gate. They saw the rose bush. They saw the way Silas's ranch was thriving, and the way Anna seemed to carry a new light within her. One afternoon, Silas asked her to walk with him. They didn't take the path toward town, but went down to the creek, to the very spot where the handover had taken place. The place where their story had truly begun. The light was soft and golden, filtering through the trees. The water murmured over the stones. They stood for a while in comfortable silence, watching the play of light on the water. Then Silas turned to her. "Anna," he began, his voice steady, though she could see a tension in his hands. "I've been slow about this. I know that." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I came here, I was just looking for a place to be quiet. I wasn't looking for anyone. But that day I saw you. And I knew my quiet would be better with your quiet next to it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. "I had to be sure," he said softly. "Sure that I was a man who was worthy of your time. I hope I am." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, was a ring. It was not a diamond. It was a simple band of silver, holding a small, smooth stone of turquoise, the color of a summer sky. "It was my mother's," he said. "It's all I have of her." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "I don't have much to offer, just a life of hard work and my word. But my life is steady, and it would be a better one, a truer one, with you in it." He took a breath. "Will you marry me, Anna?" Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the creek, the trees, his dear, earnest face. She had spent a lifetime building walls to protect a heart she never thought anyone would want. And here was this man, this quiet, steady man, who had not tried to break down her walls, but had simply waited for her to open the gate. She reached out and touched the ring. It was cool and solid. Real. She looked up at him, and a rare, true smile broke across her face. A smile that reached her eyes and lit them from within. "You were not slow, Silas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were deliberate and patient." She met his gaze. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he stepped forward at the creek. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Their wedding was a simple affair. They went to the courthouse in town on a bright, cold morning in November. The justice of the peace presided, a man whose spectacles were perpetually sliding down his nose. Sheriff Miller, looking pleased and slightly proprietary, stood as Silas's witness. George Alcott and his wife, Clara, stood for Anna. Clara had shyly presented Anna with a small bunch of late-blooming wildflowers before the ceremony. It was a small gesture, but it felt momentous. A few other townspeople gathered at the back of the room, their faces reflecting a quiet curiosity that had finally settled into acceptance. They had watched this unlikely story unfold, and they had seen its truth. They saw the way Silas looked at Anna, a look of profound respect and deep, quiet love. And they saw the way Anna stood beside him, her customary reserve softened by a secure and visible happiness. She no longer looked like she was on the edge of their world. She looked like she was at the center of her own. When the justice pronounced them man and wife, Silas did not kiss her with passion. He simply took her hand, raised it to his lips, and pressed a gentle kiss to the silver and turquoise ring. It was a promise, a quiet, binding thing. In that moment, Anna felt as if she had finally arrived at a place she had always been headed, without ever knowing the way. The fence lines were gone. She was home. 5 years passed. They passed not in a rush, but in the steady, satisfying rhythm of seasons turning, of work done, of a life being built. The two properties were joined, the fence between them taken down post by post until it was impossible to tell where Anna's land had ended and Silas's had begun. It was all just theirs now. The ranch thrived under their combined care. Silas's steady labor and Anna's deep knowledge of the land were a perfect partnership. The herd was healthy, the pastures were well managed, and the hardscrabble ranch that had broken others had finally found people stubborn enough to love it into prosperity. The cabin had grown. A new room had been added and then another. The porch now wrapped around 2 sides of the house, and the hardy rose bush Silas had brought had climbed a trellis, producing a riot of deep red blooms every summer. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Anna was in her garden, which was now twice its original size, a sprawling, orderly testament to her skill. 2 small children were playing near the porch steps. A boy of 4 with his father's steady gray eyes, and a girl of 2 with her mother's dark hair and serious gaze. They played in a comfortable, quiet way, their laughter like the sound of bells in the vast silence of the plains. Silas was on the porch, mending a piece of harness, his large hands moving with a familiar, competent grace. He often worked here now instead of in the barn just to be near them. He watched his family, a deep contentment settling into his bones. It was a quiet life, a simple life, but it was full to the brim. He finished his work and set the harness aside. He walked over to the garden and stood beside Anna, his presence a familiar comfort. She did not look up immediately, continuing to pull a stubborn weed from the rich soil. They often worked like this, in a shared silence that needed no words. Finally, she straightened up, brushing the dirt from her hands and arching her back. She looked at their children, then at the house, then at the wide, endless sky. "It's a good life," she said softly. Silas nodded, his gaze following hers. He watched his son carefully stacking stones, his brow furrowed in concentration. He thought back to the man he had been 5 years ago, a man who had sought only solitude, a man who had believed his heart was a closed and locked room. He remembered that day at the creek, the brittle tension, the fear in the eyes of good men. He remembered the choice he had made, not out of bravery, but out of a simple gut-level conviction. And he remembered seeing Anna, her stillness a rock in a churning river of panic. "I am grateful every day," he said, his voice low. "That Sheriff Miller was a coward." Anna turned to look at him, a slow smile touching her lips. She saw the man he was, the lines of sun and time etched around his eyes. She saw the goodness in him, a thing as solid and reliable as the earth beneath their feet. "And I am grateful," she replied, her voice just as low, "that you were not." He reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced the outline of the silver ring on her finger, a gesture that had become a silent language between them. He had stepped forward into the unknown that day, and in doing so had found the one thing, the one person, that made the world feel whole and right. He had seen her clearly then, in that moment of crisis. and he had seen her clearly every day since. It was enough. It was everything.